On this video, we're going to talk about rondo forms and how those developed by the beginning of the classical era. But we're also going to look back to the 14th century for the beginnings of this form, which is actually based on a poetic structure. But first, I'd like to just diagram the three principal rondo types that are used in sonata cycle works, most often like third movement of concertos in the classical period, or for ABA kind of structures that you find in second movements of symphonies, chamber music works. But the other types that are known as the 5-part and 7-part rondo are associated most often with the last movement of the sonata cycle. But you can find some slow movements that have that 5-part rondo construction. At any rate, a rondo is something that has a returning theme. So rondo comes from the term that has to do with something that's round, something that comes back to the beginning again. And so the rondo theme is stated at the beginning of the work, most typically. You rarely have an introduction to it. And then you're looking for that rondo theme to come back in the tonic key. And so the number of times that it comes back determines which of the three rondo forms it is. And so there are a couple of different ways of describing these. The textbook talks about first rondo, second rondo, and third rondo. So, but we're also going to continue to use the terminology that you learned in the Bidward text, which uses 3-part, 5-part, and 7-part rondo. So, this basic pattern, which is one of those fundamental patterns in Western music, is known as 3-part rondo or first rondo. So 3-part rondo is used in describing the number of different sections. First rondo is used by theorists to describe just this first basic pattern, and it has to deal with the number of times that the rondo theme returns. If you're in a minor key, then you expect those typical key relationships. You can look for transition between the themes, or a retransition, put in parentheses because those are optional auxiliary numbers. And very often you'll have some kind of coda or codetta. So you'll see this referred to as a ternary pattern as well. Typically in sonata movements or chamber music works or concerto movements, you use the designation having to do with a particular rondo rather than ternary, but you see it used interchangeably, really. All right, so that's the first type. The second rondo then has an extra digression and hence an extra return of the main theme, the main rondo theme. So you'll have a C theme, and then a final return, and then possibly a coda or codetta. So I'll just put again here, transition is something that is optional. It brings you back retransition. The key for this second digression will be in a key other than tonic or dominant or tonic and relative major. So it's in another, third key area, something that's contrasting. So you could have like subdominant, so that is not as specific. But the rondo theme always returns in tonic. And so this would be called the second rondo or a 5-part rondo. So I think we're going to just use this, what you're used to using from Benward, instead of what's used in the Stein textbook. But you should know those, two different ways of describing this. So again, this is something that you can find in second movements of sonata cycle works or last movements. For the last type, though, it is typically a final movement construction. And the one thing about the 7-part rondo is that it begins like the 5-part rondo, but it features a return of the B theme in the tonic key. And so for that reason, it's sometimes called sonata-rondo because of the similarity that it has to sonata-allegro form. So I'm going to write here that it's called sonata-rondo form, especially if the middle section is a development section. Okay, so that form So, especially if it uses a development section here for the middle, then we're going to use the term sonata-rondo and describe it that way. Some theorists just use sonata-rondo in a way that's synonymous with 7-part rondo, whether or not it has a C theme or not. So if it's a development, it won't have that C theme. Development is going to be based on thematic ideas from the beginning part of the movement. So I'll just put here, based on opening themes. And then the second characteristic of a development, as you know, is that it will modulate. So it touches on, at least a couple of keys. It won't be just centered around one key. All right, so like I mentioned, the B theme is recapitulated in time. And so this is the biggest of the rondo forms. And I want you to be able to compare sonata-rondo with sonata-allegro. So what we'll do is compare the version of the 7-part rondo that has a development for this middle section. So I'll just put here X. as far as the key center, because it's not determined exactly what keys it will go through, but like a development section, it's an elaboration on the ideas that you heard earlier in the movement. So the things that are the same is that you can look at it in three sections like this, with this opening ABA serving like an exposition. And then this, of course, is the development section, just like you have in sonata-allegro. And then the recapitulation of the B theme is one of the main ideas that forms this connection with sonata-allegro. So, same as sonata-allegro, three main sections. With the third section recapitulating, now let's do it this way, recapitulating in tonic the first section. But they're different because in sonata-rondo, right here after the restatement of the A theme, and sonata-allegro does that too when you consider the double bars and repeats around the exposition. So on the repeats of the exposition of sonata-allegro form, you repeat the whole thing, both the A theme and the transition, the B theme, the closing theme. But in sonata-rondo, you don't have double bars and repeats. It has that written out return, but then it goes straight away, instead of having a repeat of the end, it goes straight from the repeat of the A theme to the development. And then sonata-rondo has this extra restatement of the A theme at the end of the movement. So I want you to be able to, compare and contrast these two forms. They have a lot more in common than they are different. And they have the same basic components of, principal themes. These themes will be, in song forms. And so you have the principal themes, and then you have auxiliary numbers that connect the themes or return if it's having to do with bringing back the A theme. Or even at this point where you bring back the B theme, you'd have a retransition there. And so, a lot more things that are similar than are different. But this is an important form in the classical and romantic era, and is the one that's the most complicated as far as just having the most number of components to it. So we will stop there for this video, and then next I'll be talking about the beginning of the rondo idea in the 14th century.